Hey you, and welcome. My name is Mike, and in this solo video, we are once again heading off to a series of national parks, each with their own dark and baffling, let's be honest, secrets. From Germany to Canada, from serial killers to legendary creatures with real-life victims, if you can believe that. Yeah, I know, it sounds weird, and it is weird, but it happened. We are, as always, gonna get into it all. But before we begin, please subscribe to see new stories for the dark every single week now. Let's give it a go. Let's begin with the Göhrde State Forest. And though it's not like the biggest state forest we've ever covered stories from, it's about 30 square miles, it does have a very long and rich history in Germany of being a place, guess what, kings, lords, those sort of lads, they go hunting in that forest, so look at you. So that's great, but on May 21st, 1989, a very different sort of hunting would take place in the Göhrde State Forest. That was when one of Germany's most terrifying serial killers was prowling those woods. That day, a couple, Ursula and Peter Reinhold, were driving into the park for a nice walk in the woods and a picnic. They never came out. See, when the couple didn't emerge from the forest, they were reported missing, and soon after their picnic, it was found in those woods. Though they pretty much just found like a blanket. Missing was the picnic basket, missing was their car keys, and in fact their car wasn't found, parked outside the forest either. The car would later be found in a town a good bit away. It's believed that whoever ended their lives used that car as his own getaway vehicle, and there was no trace of what happened to the missing couple. It was as if they just went for a nice lovely picnic in the national park and then they were gone. An old primeval German forest had swallowed them whole.
Das Ehepaar Ursula und Peter Reinhold aus Bergedorf ist heute gesucht worden und ist immer noch nicht gefunden worden. Sie erinnern sich, am Sonntag wurde der Wagen des Ehepaares im Kreis Lüchow-Dannenberg gefunden. Das Ehepaar selbst ist seit dem 21. Mai verschwunden.
In fact, what happened to the Reinholds would remain a complete mystery to investigators, to family, to friends for almost 2 whole months. 7 weeks, in fact. That was when the next answer would come, and when the next victims would come too. On July 12th, 1989, 3 blueberry pickers were out in the Göhrde National Park, and they were just doing what blueberry pickers do, right? Picking blueberries. And as they got deeper and deeper into the forest, they noticed a smell. A decomposing, rotting flesh smell was just emanating from all around them. At first they thought, maybe it was a deer, some kind of animal had died out here, but continuing deeper in, investigating, they found the naked and decomposing bodies of Ursula and Peter. Stumbling upon this in complete, stunned silence, after a few minutes they knew exactly what they had to do, and they began racing for the park entrance to report this to the authorities. However, as they were swiftly exiting the park to report what they had just found, they did run into a man. He was a middle-aged man, and he was carrying a picnic basket, and he was acting very skittish and weird when these 3 blueberry pickers were passing him. He was acting so weird that the blueberry pickers remembered him. Even though they had just found 2 decomposing bodies in the forest, they still remembered him clear as day, to the point when he would come up again and again in the investigations. Because the very same day Peter and Ursula Reinhold were found, a separate couple would disappear in this park. That was Ingrid Warmbier and Bernd Michael Kopping. They were also driving into the forest. See, Ingrid and Michael had been having an affair together and were going into the park to continue it. The illicit lovers were out in the woods for a spot of lunch when they met a similar fate to the Reinholds 7 weeks prior. Ingrid and Michael both had their hands tied behind their backs. While the cause of death was the same in all 4 victims, a single gunshot wound to the head, 46-year-old Ingrid's body showed a scary escalation in the level of violence prior to her death. She'd experienced severe trauma to her head, her face in particular. Her chest was also extremely damaged, as if the person who killed her was kneeling on her chest and just pounding her in the head. Based on a timeline police would later put together, it is, as I said, believed that both Ingrid and Michael were murdered in the Göhrde State Forest the very same day the Reinholds were found in the same state forest. In fact, the only reason that, the police were investigating this, they were setting up a cordon around the Reinholds, their decomposing bodies. The only reason they didn't hear the gunshot wounds from another couple being murdered not far away is because the killer simply chose his location well in sort of a valley where the gunshots wouldn't echo out, and he'd use a small caliber handgun to murder them both. Then when the blueberry pickers, remembered, oh, we've seen this weird guy, he's acting very, very strange, a mugshot was done of the same man.
Sollte die Leiche hier am 12. versteckt worden sein, dann müssten sie sich ja fast begegnet sein, die Polizei und der Täter.
Das ist nicht auszuschließen. Bloß wir waren nicht in diesem Bereich.
Sondern 500 Meter weiter.
Genau, etwas südlich.
Das ist natürlich ein starkes Stück, dass das hier genauso fast zu einer Begegnung hätte kommen können.
Ja, so sehen wir es auch.
The bodies of Ingrid and Michael were discovered 2 weeks after they were murdered, as the police were continuing to search the Göhrde State Forest for more evidence of the previous couple that was killed in those woods. They were found on July 27, 1989, less than a kilometer from the scene of the first murders. Again, missing from the scene was the car Ingrid and Michael had driven to the forest in, along with the keys, but the car was later found in a small town not far away. So who could have possibly committed such a heinous crime? That's 4 people murdered, 2 couples in the same forest, around the same time. This killer just really does not care. In fact, I would say the blueberry pickers were lucky that's probably why this guy they met was acting so skittish and strange around them, because he was trying to sort of kicking the tires, if you will, of, will you guys be next? He kept going. He found another couple having a picnic. Yeah. So police having 4 dead bodies in it seemed like the MO was the exact same, and all of them, they knew that also this was likely not the first time and wouldn't be the last time this guy would strike. Who was this guy? Well, that's the $1 million question, but let's talk about one Kurt Werner Weichmann for a second. Kurt Werner Weichmann was born in Lüneburg, Germany in 1949. Now, Kurt grew up in a chaotic and dysfunctional family environment that was so bad that he'd actually been placed in a facility for troubled youths. His father was especially violent, something he'd inherit and take out on small animals in the woods around his home. He developed, a habit of killing animals, burying them around the place. That's like a ding, ding, ding for, oh, serial killer. Bingo. As so often is the case, putting him in a facility for troubled youths did anything but actually help him. Kurt, in fact, at 14 years old, he ran away and he ran home. He ran to his home, right, and his parents were renting out their basement to another couple who had a baby. Kurt waited for the male who was living in, his parents' basement to leave, and then he went in to rob the woman and he threatened her with a big knife. Threatened her and her baby. It was in 1966, at age 16, though that's when he really began to escalate in his level of violence. He was on the road one day, a cyclist was going by him, he pushed her off her bike, he dragged her into the woods, and he assaulted her in there. But because he was still under the age of 18, he kind of just got basically a slap on the wrist for a horrific crime. In 1967, shock horror, he was arrested again for threatening police officers with a gun. The next year, Kurt shot a stranger. Probably. The victim, 38-year-old Ilse Gerkens, was out cycling when she was shot 4 times in the back. Though the weapon was low caliber, Ilse's wounds were catastrophic and she died at the scene, likely within seconds of the first shot hitting her. Now, Weichmann was never actually charged in the incident, and officially it went down as unsolved, though several witnesses who had been in the area when she was killed would say, they'd seen a young man matching his description. Wow, it's not like he has a history of this sort of stuff. They would also later find news clippings of this story in his possession, but this is literally a case of somebody who's driving by or cycling by and him going pow 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 for no reason whatsoever. He did a lot of things for no reason whatsoever. It was in 1970, though, that Kurt Werner Weichmann would do his first real time in prison. A 17-year-old girl was hitchhiking. She had the bad luck of Kurt being the one to pick her up. He assaulted her, and then he was actually going to kill her when she managed to convince him that she wouldn't report this, she wouldn't say anything to the police, and he let her go. Of course, she immediately went to the police to tell them what he had done to her, but she didn't know who he is, she didn't know his name, And so the police put out a description of who her attacker looked like. Kurt, get this, Kurt read the description of the person himself, in the newspaper of who the police were looking for. He went to the police himself to correct their description. He was, of course, arrested on the spot. While still in prison, Weichman met a 43-year-old woman through a personal ad in the newspapers, and with whom he moved in with when he was eventually released in 1974. And it just so happened that when he moved in with this woman, a number of female hitchhikers in the area just suddenly started going missing. Everywhere Kurt went, where he lived, it's all in this like northern Germany area, people just happened to end up going missing or being found violently murdered. But it was one disappearance in particular that really, I would say, closed the case, but it also brought to light the real monster that Kurt Werner Weichman was. On August 14th, 1989, just a few weeks after the 4 murders in the national park, 41-year-old Birgit Meyer went missing from her home in Lüneburg, where Kurt was born, where he was living now, and only 30 minutes away from the Göhrde State Park. At first, police just assumed she'd either purposely taken her own life, or if someone had harmed her. When she went missing, she was in the process of a divorce, so the police, their initial thoughts was, well, it's gonna be anybody. It's gonna be him. But no, he was actually soon ruled out. She just disappeared from this house. In fact, police were probably scratching their heads quite a lot because you have a national park nearby where there was 4 people found brutally murdered. You have several hitchhikers being found murdered or not being found at all. And then you have Birgit Meyer, who disappeared from her very own home. When police began digging into Birgit Meyer's personal life a little more deeply, several links between her and Kurt came to light. The two had met at a neighbor's party around a month before she went missing. Even though he very briefly became their primary suspect, investigators weren't able to really investigate or charge Kurt with anything related to Birgit Meyer's disappearance because Kurt's wife, she had a rock-solid alibi for Kurt for the night Birgit went missing. Yeah, rock solid.
Wir vermissen dich so sehr. Und ich denke Tag und Nacht an dich. Ich vermisse dich so sehr und wir lieben dich doch alle so sehr. Und melde dich doch bitte bei uns. Wo bist du denn?
It took 4 years for the police to finally get a search warrant for Kurt Werner Weichman's home. And the search of Kurt's home dug up a lot more horrifying secrets, than anybody ever could have imagined. I mean, people knew he was bad news. He'd been linked to some horrific attacks of women, murders even, but this is a whole different kettle of fish, or a whole different kettle of sauerkraut, or something. I don't know, it's German. Hidden behind a soundproof door was a secret room in his home, where police discovered a treasure trove of horrors, including 2 small caliber rifles, the type used in several murders they were investigating, along with stun guns, handcuffs, complete with blood spatter, and a variety of tranquilizers and sleeping pills, even syringes. That wasn't even the most damning evidence though, with that honor being reserved for a pile of newspaper clippings and VHS tapes with footage taken from news reports about the unsolved murders in the area, including the Ilse Gherkin's shooting, the Göhrde double murders, and Birgit Meyer's disappearance. And basically, Kurt had a fully stocked murder sex dungeon. Yeah. One of them. What's with the murder sex dungeons, guys? So they had all of this, however, they didn't have Kurt. Kind of for a bit. Because as soon as he saw the police come to his house, he booked it down the road. He did a legger, but he was caught soon after at a routine just traffic stop, and he was clapped in irons. And unfortunately for this, justice would never truly be served. Because 10 days after his arrest, Kurt, while in a jail cell, he took his own life. And, let's not cry over spilt milk here because, I think him taking his own life saved a lot of lives. But one thing was that when Kurt died, he left a note, a very strange note, to his wife and to his family members, to his brother. The note instructed that the house he lived in, the murder sex dungeon house, remain in the family. It always has to stay in the family. because the end of Kurt's life wouldn't be the end of his story. I mean, they found guns, blood spatter, items he would have used, tools right in his home, but they didn't find Birgit Meyer, which is what, initially led them here. They didn't find a whole number of women who had gone missing, and they wouldn't for decades. Because in 2017, 28 years after Kurt Werner Weichmann died, police decided, you know what? That old house, Kurt demanded, his dying wish was that this house remain within the family. Wonder why he would want to stay in the family. Wonder why he wouldn't want any strangers, digging up the place to put in a new pool. Well, the police were like, maybe we should just kick the tires there, kick some rocks over there, see if we missed anything. Yeah, I mean, they found a lot, but did they find everything? No. This time, they were really thorough. They ripped the place completely apart. And they found the most shocking shit of all. After all these years, during the many searches of his house, Birgit Meyer's body had been beneath their feet the entire time. Her body was found buried under Weichmann's garage. She had a blue plastic bag wrapped around her head and had been likely killed by a single gunshot to her skull. Her body had been there for some time, likely killed in 1989 soon after her kidnapping. So it was impossible to get a full picture of the horrors Birgit experienced in her final hours, but maybe that's a good thing. Her family finally had an answer as to where she had gone, but that was just the tip. That was just the tippity tip of the iceberg of what they found. In total, they excavated over 400 different items buried around the property. Items ranged all the way from a variety of items of, women's clothes, purses, handbags, all the way up to an entire car. He buried an entire car under his property. As of right now, Kurt is the prime suspect in over 24 murders, and obviously no shit, including Birgit Meyer's, the Göhrde State Forest murders, and countless other hitchhikers and other women who went missing around this area. There was a breakthrough in the Göhrde State Forest murders when Ingrid and Michael's car, the second couple killed, well, their car, it had been dumped elsewhere, and Kurt's DNA was found in that car. But there's so many other unsolved murders that a guy like Kurt is for sure as shit responsible for. And before we continue heading off into national parks, hiking and all that, if you're going to do that, you really need something that will keep you going. Something full of vitamins, minerals, and energy. And that is why this whole video is sponsored by my new best friends, AG1. What's that? Well, I hear you're barking, big dog. AG1 is your all-in-one daily foundational nutrition supplement. Drink it first thing in the morning or drink it after a workout, like myself, and wow, just look at that, glistening. AG1 will keep your clock ticking all night. AG1 is backed by multiple research studies, giving you more energy, doubling the level of healthy bacteria in your gut, and enriching their biome. Well, color me intrigued, but what you really need to know is that it is nutrient dense. It's got everything you need to keep you going. If you are trying to have a healthy diet, which you should, because I care about you and I want you to eat healthy, you need to drink AG1. As I said, I genuinely do take it every single day. Hey, my 5-pound weights ain't gonna lift themselves. Before I started AG1, I would drink so much coffee. Just to give me that energy. But drinking a lot of coffee, I would drink like 5 to 6 cups a day. And well, it's not really good for you to drink that much coffee, and it made me feel kind of like poop. Since I started taking AG1 though, not anymore. I barely drink coffee nowadays. I just take my AG1. It keeps me going, it makes me feel all sorts of good, and it has the research studies to prove it. 97% of participants in a research study felt more energy after 30 days. 91% of participants noticed they needed less coffee after 60 days. I'm one of them. I mean, not literally, but I definitely agree with them. It's a good old part of Mike's old daily routine. So please, big dogs, check out the link down below in the description or scan this QR code here, and you can get a 1-year supply of vitamin D3 plus K2 and 5 AG1 travel packs for free with your first subscription. It is free of artificial flavors, artificial colors, preservatives. It's free of gluten. It's free of dairy, it's free of lactose, it's free of egg, peanuts, it's vegetarian and vegan friendly. It's for everybody to make sure you can keep going. Filling you with your energy, your nutrition, your everything. I love it and you will too. Tastes like vanilla, in case you're wondering. But you can add lemon or whatever you want to it. I just drink it with water, because it tastes good. Once again, scan the QR code or click the link in the description to get 1-year supply of vitamin D3 plus K2 and 5 AG1 travel packs for free with your first subscription. Thank you so much to AG1 for sponsoring and supporting that chapter. Now let's get back to one of our national park stories. The word Nahanni, it comes from the First Nations tribe of Dene, who live in northwestern Canada. Specifically in the Northwest Territory, right where this story, or rather stories, they all take place there. Nahanni, in their language, right, it means basically the area where the Naha people once lived. The Naha people were another First Nations tribe who lived in this area pretty close to the Dene tribe. As you can guess, they lived in what we now call the Nahanni National Park Preserve, and whoa. As you can see, I think whoa is the only appropriate word. This national park is located in the distant northwest of Canada. The kind of place where if you wanted to live without ever seeing a single soul, you would go there. I entered this bad boy into Google Maps and I had to ask for directions. It's nestled in this extensive mountain range, full of untouched forests, peaks, sinkholes, caves that dot the vale like eyes, with a horrifying wind that sounds like screams coming from the depths of the earth, whipping through the valley, surrounded by mountains which remain nameless. So that's a little bit of the setting for this stories. And you know what, names are a funny thing, because while this seems like one of the few places that remains untouched by people, untouched by civilization, you know, the last free places on this planet, the beautiful Nahanni National Park, well, it also has another name. It's also known as the Valley of the Headless Men, for good reason. Because I guess you wouldn't name it like that willy-nilly. The Nahanni National Park also goes by the name Headless Valley because a number of people have found their heads separated from their bodies.
Nahanni, where few men go, far off river with shores of death. The valley where the skeletons had no skulls. The legend tells of a lost gold mine hidden in this strange wilderness. The men who died were looking for it.
And the legends of the South Nahanni River, they go back even to the Naha people themselves who lived here once. Legend has it that all these inhabitants of this river valley mysteriously disappeared centuries ago, and the myths of the valley only increased from there. See, many of the frontiersmen who would have been, the original white explorers into this area, they would come out, right, with all these legends and tales of evil spirits that roamed the valley, of these pale cannibal tribes who murdered anybody who would venture in, of these giant monsters, Sasquatch, Yeti-like creatures, who would just, that this valley was just evil. You just won't have it, right? You shouldn't go here. The fact that it was full of gold might have something to do with that. But as usual, these are all good stories, they're all good ones to tell around the fire when you're out camping at night. So the Nahanni Valley then remained quiet for many years. Until the late 1800s, in fact, when word spread of gold in the area and there was a gold rush. It was an extremely difficult area to get to, right? The mountain's high, the river's rapid. But two brothers, Willie and Frank McLeod, they had gold in their eyes and they were determined to go get some of that. They were sons of a Scotsman and had lived in northern Canada for most of their lives. They were very experienced frontiersmen. In 1904, a couple of natives had come into nearby Fort Laird to trade for supplies and such, and one of the McLeod brothers noticed that one of these natives was trading for supplies with gold nuggets, and so McLeod said, "Where'd you get that? You mind me asking, where'd you get that?" After a bit of poking and prodding, a lot of poking and prodding, they said, finally, the Nahanni Valley. That's where we found this gold. And so, you gotta be shitting me. The brothers, equipped with all manner of gear necessary to get some of that gold out of those mountains, set off for the Nahanni Valley, determined to make their fortune. They got themselves a canoe and set off up the Nahanni River, looking for the first place to do their panning and digging. But they never returned. They never returned from the Nahanni Valley. It would be 3 years till their younger brother, a guy named Charlie, he was determined to head up into the Nahanni Valley to search for what had happened to them. See, a couple of weeks before, the Frank and Willie's canoe had floated down river, and that was their only way in and out of this valley. I mean, the easier way, let's say, in and out of this valley. So their canoe being found ways away from where they'd gone, that spelled bad news. And so Charlie, he got a couple of ex-Mounties, First Nations peoples, and then they set off in their own canoes up the South Nahanni River, and they were staring the entire time, looking for any signs of what had happened to Frank and Willie three whole years before. But as I said, they were very experienced outdoorsmen, frontiersmen. They had lived most of their lives in northern Canada, so that's why it took 3 years before people were like, okay, let's start to get worried. They did find one stretch of riverbank where trees had been cut down, so they assumed that at one point the elder MacLeods had made their camp here, and they also found a runner. Written on it was, "We have found a fine prospect." So, had they found what they were looking for? Had they found, a literal gold mine? But there was no signs of the two brothers here, so they kept canoeing up the river. They did find signs pretty soon. A few days later, they made a discovery and found Frank and Willie in a place that would forever be known as Dead Men Valley. On a stretch of riverbank lay them both. They were now skeletons, and they both had been decapitated. One of the brothers was covered in a blanket. The other lay pretty close beside, but his arm was outstretched, reaching for an old, rusty rifle. It seemed like one of the brothers had been attacked in his sleep, and the other had awoken, and had tried in vain to reach for his weapon, but he didn't make it. And neither Frank nor Willie's heads were ever found. It was like they lay, on the riverbank in full view. It was almost like a warning, kind of way. Like they lay just in full view of anybody who would come after them, as in, have a look at that. Maybe you should think twice about before coming here. Willie still had his gold ring, and Frank's gold pocket watch lay nearby. Also nearby lay a box containing a gold-bearing quartz. It truly looked like they'd finally found their prize, but had lost their heads for it. And I mean, something that's not mentioned a lot when you look at the Nahanni Valley is that Frank and Willie had been up here a couple of times. This wasn't their first rodeo into the Nahanni Valley, and they'd found gold here multiple times before. But this trip, I guess, maybe they just went too deep into the valley. And you know what as well? Is that Frank and Willie were not alone. When they went in there, they had gone up into the valley with a guy, a Scotsman named Robert Weir. He had gone with them, and he was nowhere to be found. See, Robert Weir had met them in the fort, and he had noticed some gold that Frank and Willie had, which they'd gotten from a previous trip up the Nahanni. And so he asked, hey, where did you get that? And they said, got it in Nahanni Valley. We're heading up for another expedition. Join us. Come on in. And that was the initial theory, that Robert had killed the two MacLeods, that he had murdered them for the gold and then set off by himself. But why was there gold left with them if he had murdered them and then set off? However, it would be the following year that Robert's body was actually found. He was found about 3 miles away from where the MacLeods' headless bodies had been found. Well, rather I should say it's what the Mounties believed it to be his body. It had been so long there was no possible proof it was. He was also found with no gold on him, so people believed that that's not actually Robert, because he would have had some gold on him. What the Mounties believed happened on this little expedition is that all 3 of them starved to death. The MacLeods had died first, and Robert had tried in vain to make his way down to civilization, but had passed away. They couldn't escape because their canoe had floated away. But then at the same time, people also believed that the MacLeods were such good outdoorsmen and such good frontiersmen, they wouldn't have starved to death. They would have known how to hunt and gather and yada yada yada. Also, why were they missing their heads? If it had been an animal attack, you could say they starved to death and then a wolf or a bear came and took their head away. But you'd imagine the rest of their bones. There's not much meat in a skull. You think that the rest of their bones would be scattered all over the place, but it wasn't. They were just decapitated. So everybody knew about the myths and the legends in the Nahanni Valley, and so, it's not ideal to go there. But what then people began to think is that the MacLeods had found a lost city of gold in the Nahanni Valley, and they had been killed for it. So that kind of just spurred up people going in to the valley to, try and find it. But one thing to know is that you'd think 2 lads losing their noggins would be kind of like, no, maybe you shouldn't come here. But the people who were exploring the Nahanni Valley weren't exactly your titans of industry types. These were people who were down on their luck. who were panning for a little bit of gold, and who had really no other opportunities, who were coming here, and they would die in this valley. In fact, a lot of people died in this valley over the years. In 1910, Martin Jorgensen, a Norwegian woodsman, decided to try his luck in the valley. 5 years later, his headless corpse was found beside his burnt-out cabin. According to, well, legend, Martin's body was found right between where his burnt-out cabin was and where the nearby creek was. As I said, sans head. The bucket that he had been used to fill with water was found beside the creek. So what it's believed to have happened is that Martin, he woke one night, his cabin was on fire, he grabbed his bucket, went down to the creek to fill it with water, and was bringing it back when something caused him to drop his bucket to try and run away, and he was struck down dead. And Martin's head, like the two before him, was also never recovered. In 1928, Charlie McLeod came across another headless body, beside which was a rifle, the barrel bent at a severe angle. In fact, it seemed like the more people who came here searching for the lost McLeod mine, the more the legend of the valley grew, the Valley of the Headless Men. More explorers vanished, were found dead in strange ways, like for example, John O'Brien, found frozen to death mid-lighting his fire, or Ernie Savard, found lying in his sleeping bag, his head severed. The curse of the valley was very real, if you also kind of discount how dangerous, how northerly this valley was, and how you would have to be a real tough son of a bitch to make it out here. But who was taking people's heads? Because even if you're dying of, exposure or whatever, these people were still losing their heads which were never found. Maybe it could be rival gold miners, who, this valley having a terrifying reputation, it'd be beneficial to them, who want to keep all the gold for themselves. But the strangest story about the Nahanni Valley comes from one May, Annie, she went by Lafferty. She was described by many people as a strange girl, and she was from Fort Simpson. And it was during the summer of 1921 that Annie was traveling with her cousin Mary and Mary's husband Poole. They all lived in the forts in this area, and so they were traveling through the Nahanni Valley. There was Annie, her cousin Mary, Poole, and some other First Nations peoples. They were heading to another fort to stock up on supplies. Now, during this trip, Annie, she'd been acting just very, very strange. Very, very weird. It really seemed like she was missing home and missing her family. Then one day, while they were all going through the trail, she simply vanished into thin air. They began searching for her at first, thinking she'd just simply wandered off. She just simply wandered off the trail. But they could absolutely not find what had happened to Annie. They began to get increasingly panicked, and eventually Poole and 5 native hunters, they found her trail. They finally were onto something, so they began to follow it, and it led way, way, way off the trail they were originally going on. It led deeper into the valley, deeper into the woods. But it was very worrying when they found the trail, because this was Poole and 5, 6 experienced hunters all together, right, tracking, this young girl down. And it was as if she was fine, because they could not keep up with her trail. They ended up following her trail for 9 days as it led deeper and deeper into the valley, and they could not come across her. They should have. These were fit, strong, experienced hunters, and they could not find her. Her trail just kept going. They should have caught up her. They didn't. They would find bits of her clothing in the woods and in the brambles, as if she'd just been being dragged straight through the trees. But she somehow kept going. Somehow she managed to climb sheer cliff faces that the hunters could not even climb. The hunters eventually had to give up. They simply assumed she died. She must have disappeared somewhere out there. And she was never found. Her trail simply went on, and then on again. And a final kind of postscript to the story of missing Annie Lafferty, was, when her disappearance was reported in the newspapers, a hunter named Big Charlie came forward, and he said he believed he had seen her. He said he was camping out one night in his tent, when outside the tent, he heard some rocks falling into a nearby river. What caused that disturbance, he thought to himself. He looks outside the tent. He sees a naked woman going up a nearby hill. Was that Annie? She'd surely, her clothes had just been ripped off as she'd gone into the woods. But he also said she was running up the hill on all 4 limbs, like an animal. So, that's freaky. That story is definitely the most urban legendy out of them all about the missing Annie is true. Her being seen running on all 4s like an animal. I'm not sure if that's true. There's a lot of strange stories from the Nahanni Valley. And of course, right, a lot of this is folklore, just creepy stories to tell around the campfire of this remote. This is remote of remote. kind of place located in the far north of Canada. When you're in places like this, things come from your subconsciousness, like when civilization was a distant memory, when you were on the lookout for bears and lions and everything like that. So you see and hear creepy things that may not really be there. And then you have these stories which go back, over 100 years, and kind of details and facts sort of get lost to history, and they also sort of get lost to make the story scarier and better. So who really knows how much of these stories are true? For example, when I was researching this, I read a book called Legends of the Nahanni Valley by Hammerson Peters. And, there's been reports of over 45 people just simply vanishing in the Valley of the Headless Men. But what that also is not counting is the fact of, as I said, the people who would have come here were people who were down on their luck. People who just wouldn't have been experienced living in the outdoors, or simply people who just left the valley without telling anybody, or moved to a different country, moved to Australia, moved back to Norway, changed their names. So the actual number of 45 people disappearing in the valley means that they probably reappeared elsewhere or just died in this extremely northerly remote place. For example, I mentioned the story of Ernie Savard being found headless in the valley. Well, who knows what was actually found, because a reporter later tracked down Ernie and he was still looking for gold, head very much still attached. There have been men found headless in the valley. That is a fact, and a lot of strange, disturbing things occurred there. But truth and legend are most certainly blurry in a place like this. But then even something can happen in our modern days which can really send a shiver down your spine that maybe there is something unexplainable in the Nahanni Valley. Before I finish with the Nahanni Valley and, its insane peaks and caves, the horrifying wind that goes through the area, it's ripe for fireside horrors that are over 100 years old. But not all of the horrors are that old. There's been some recently as 2005. It was that summer, two hunters, David Horsey and Fred Hardesty, were out in the Nahanni Valley staying at a cabin. No pictures of David Horsey are available, I'm afraid. The owner of the cabin left them for a few days to go to town get supplies. But when he returned to the cabin on June 16, 2005, the two hunters were missing. He had no idea where they'd gone. A search began throughout the valley. There was no clues as to what had happened. I mean, for a while, because when they found some answers, they were unsettling. The official search only lasted 1 week, if you can believe that, but of course, the family didn't give up. And it was of week 2, searching the Valley of the Headless Men, that they found the first missing man. On June 27th, David Horsey was found in some thick bushes, 2 miles from the cabin, in an area previously searched. So that was unsettling. His body was found there just under some bushes, and it would be determined he passed away from hypothermia. Which, this was during the summer, but at night, as you can imagine, the temperatures just plummet. But he was an experienced hunter. Why would he have been out at night? He was only 2 miles from the cabin. Why was he under some bushes? It was very strange. He was also found with burn marks on him, his arms and hands. A hole was in his shirt too, like he had been shot, with a shotgun, but his skin was untouched. And where was Fred? Well, the following week, Fred himself would be found in the Nahanni River. It was determined he had drowned. So what led these two hunters to be outside of their cabin, both dying in very different, but both very unsettling circumstances? The RCMP ruled both deaths as accidents, but the families of both men said they're not happy with that. They believe there's something more unsettling, something more nefarious occurred in the cabin. Allegedly, bullet holes were found inside the cabin, as if there had been some kind of gunfight, so had the two men decided to take pot shots at each other. But the door of the cabin was also found to be locked. So, had they ran from the cabin but had time to lock the door, neither man was found to be shot. They both, as I said, hypothermia and drowning. So what the hell happened? It was also reported there were small fires all around the cabin, as if they were trying to keep something away. David's brother said, quote, "There were bullet holes all over the place, and there was gunshot in the floor. The picture is bigger than just two guys, one of whom died of hypothermia, the other who died of drowning. There was something else that happened before all that came down." The RCMP refused to reopen this strange case. Just another one in the Valley of the Headless Men. It was May 2015, and along the Appalachian Trail, a group was hiking together. Not far from the southern end of the trail, they were close to a town called Damascus, which is located in Virginia. It's a very small place, deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains, home to less than 1,000 people. This group were hiking their way to Damascus, and this was a group of Appalachian Trail, what's called true hikers, which is when you do the hike, the Appalachian Trail from one end down in Georgia to the other end up in Maine. You do it all in a single season, which it's extremely difficult to do. Not many people can do it. This group was kind of just ragtag, people who bumped into each other, made friends along the way, they weren't like an organized group or anything. And one member of this group was a big jolly old fella named Bismarck. He was, in fact, if you can believe it, an Appalachian Trail regular. He was known as a big guy with a big smile, happy as can be. He liked people and people liked him. A gentle, good-natured fella, and he had been up and down the trail a number of times. He was well known in the AT community by 2015, to the point where if you were hiking along the trail, people would ask, "Do you know Bismarck? As in, if you knew Bismarck, if you said yes, then they were like, "Okay, you're legit. You know the trail." It was like less gatekeeping the Appalachian Trail and more Bismarck keeping the Appalachian Trail. Only Bismarck had a dark secret that would be exposed that May 2015. The Montgomery Homestead Inn, located in Damascus, was surrounded by law enforcement and FBI one Saturday in May 2015. They kicked in the door and demanded to know if the proprietor recognized this man, and they said, "Yeah, that's Bismarck." She took them up to where he was staying. He'd been staying there for a couple of days now, and they pounded on the door, demanding him to open it and come out. When he opened the door, they immediately leapt in, grabbed him, spun him around, and clapped him in irons. And then he was taken away. See, Bismarck's real name was James T. Hamas. He was a 53-year-old accountant from Ohio. A 53-year-old accountant who had been on the FBI's wanted list for 6 years. He had previously worked as an accountant at a Pepsi distributor and had been embezzling the company for over 11 years to the tune of $8.7 million. He had been taking small chunks for over a decade. It took them that long to catch on, and when they did, James Hamas vanished. What did he do? Vanishing with almost $9 million? He vanished into the wild. He went to the trail and started a new life there as Bismarck, just going up, and for 6 years he was on the Appalachian Trail, but while being one of the most wanted men in America.
Good evening, everyone. It took more than 6 years, but one of America's most wanted fugitives is behind bars tonight.
The FBI says James Hamas stole millions from a Cincinnati company. They caught him in Virginia over the weekend. This is what he looked like in '09, and this is what he looks like now. The 53-year-old has been on the run for 6 years.
But it wasn't only like the embezzlement that the FBI wanted him for and, it's believed he was on the run for. He was also linked to the very suspicious death of his wife. See, James had been your everyday, regular, normal guy on the surface, working as an accountant for a Pepsi drink distributor, right? Married to Joy, and he'd been married to her for almost 2 decades. They had a daughter together named Amanda. James and Joy had been college sweethearts, together for almost 20 years come 2003. But that was when tragedy struck. Maybe. It was around 10:30 p.m. on the night of July 23rd, 2003 that James left the home he shared with his family. His wife Joy, she was up in bed already. His daughter Amanda, she was actually out on a date that night. And so James was going to go for a wee jog that evening. Yet almost as soon as he left his home, it was engulfed in flames. James ran back but simply stood outside. While firefighters arrived, they burst into the house and they managed to take Joy out of the house, and she was rushed to hospital. But unfortunately, she was too far gone from the flames and the smoke. She would be declared brain dead and she would pass away soon afterwards. One of the strangest things about this was James immediately began apologizing to his wife's sister. Even though his wife had just died, he was saying, "I'm so sorry," to her, almost as if he was like guilty, kind of like letting his guilt kind of slip through there of him maybe having done something in the house. Like, it was suspicious that A, He had just left. So that's kind of... And the fact that his daughter was gone, like, it's a weird timing that the house would just suddenly be engulfed in flames on the one night when his wife also had gone to bed early that night. Now, there would be a full investigation. There would be no signs of foul play, and they wouldn't press charges against James. They wouldn't even announce, there was anything suspicious about the fire. But one thing that was odd is that the fire investigators could never fully determine how exactly the fire started. They didn't know. Didn't find any accelerants, but they just didn't know. Now, Joy did not have good old... Sorry folks, not this time. But James did have a woman on the side. He was having an affair. He also had a secret daughter that nobody knew about. And at this time, James had already been embezzling for a couple of years from his employer. And it's believed Joy had started asking questions. Where's all this money coming from? We're suddenly going on vacations, scuba trips, all this sort of carry on. Joy started asking questions. James didn't like the fact that his straight-edge wife was asking questions about him suddenly having a lot of cash. And well, yeah. Whatever the case, he wanted his side chick, he wanted millions of dollars, now he had them both. In fact, he almost had it all, until one day, around 2009, his employer called him into their head office in Cincinnati, Ohio one day, to ask about some financial irregularities with his accounting. James went in, he was confronted, and he said, "Gotta talk to my lawyer." So he left. And he vanished. James and the money vanished. It was 2 days after he was last seen that an arrest warrant was issued for James T. Hamas. But weirdly enough then, his wallet and his cell phone were found in a very rough area of Cincinnati, Ohio, like along the road. It's believed that they were left there, his items, his cell phone and his wallet, as in he wanted people to believe he'd been carjacked and maybe killed, and his items had been dumped here. That's not really what happened, but it's what he wanted people to think. James's vanishing was on the news. The hunt for him was extensive. He was on America's Most Wanted, TV shows, everything. This wasn't small fry, he was a wanted man. The authorities though assumed he had fled the country, had gone down old South America way, and was sipping mojitos on the beach. Never would have guessed he had decided to live rough for 6 years. That's when Bismarck was born. He would tell people, along the trail, obviously he wouldn't give his real name, he would tell people that his wife had died. And so he'd come on the trail looking for peace, trying to find peace on the trail, and he just simply never got off it. And he would simply just go up and down and up and down. Now, people really, really liked him. He was known as very generous with his money, with food. He was known as being a very kind guy. He really became a big part of the AT community. He met a woman there, her trail name was Hopper. When he wasn't on the trail during the winter, he would stay either in Maine at a working hostel or in Indiana. And he would tell people, he'd been on the trail for years and he was simply never going to leave it. He was going to die on the Appalachian Trail. But he would not get that chance because it was in the spring of 2015 that another man who had met Bismarck in 2014, the year before, he was sitting down to watch the telly, and on came an episode of American Greed. It's kind of like a true crime show. And, well, wasn't the episode just about James Hamas?
Hard to believe that somebody could violate a trust like that.
Now, Jim Hamas is missing. And the burning question is, what other secrets does he keep?
And he said, "I know him. That's Bismarck." He called the FBI. The FBI began hunting down for a guy on the trail known as Bismarck. And as I said, he was a big part of the community. Everybody knew him. Eventually, he was tracked down to Damascus. They knew his route because at this time Damascus was having like a little festival called Trail Days, festival celebrating the Appalachian Trail. They knew he would be there. They found him. They got him. And that was when Bismarck's story came to an end. He was ultimately sentenced to 8 years in prison. He was also ordered to repay all of the money he stole. That was in 2016, so that would make him out about now, actually, in fact. The FBI is still investigating his first wife's death, and only $600,000 of the almost $9 million he stole have ever been recorded. But it's known that he would make frequent trips down to the Caribbean, specifically the Cayman Islands. So that'll give you a good idea of where the money probably is. Why he chose the Appalachian Trail is a mystery. I mean, you didn't need to steal that much money to start going on the trail, and if you're on the run with that much money, there's a lot of places you could have gone to that don't require extradition. It's almost like, why would you steal that much money, if this is what you wanted to do the whole time? And you can do it for, you know, almost nothing. He truly loved it, which really makes what he did and what he possibly did all the more stranger. Thank you so much for watching. It truly means the absolute world to me. I hope you enjoyed these stories of horrors from national parks. This was episode 2 in that series, or maybe even more. I don't know. Stories of horror in national parks are always completely fascinating to me. So I hope you enjoyed this old one. There's a lot more I can do. So let's keep it running. Let's keep it running. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you're looking for some more That Chapter, you can please check out the That Chapter Patreon, where you get every episode early and ad-free. And there's also a whole playlist of Patreon-only, Patreon-exclusive videos right there too, so give it a go. Or, as always, if you're looking for more, you can check out the That Chapter podcast, which releases a brand new episode every Monday morning. It's all podcast-exclusive stories, so it's completely different to the stories I tell here on the channel, so give that a go. But you know what? Until the next old video, which should be up when it's up, please take care of each other, and please take care of yourselves, because I love you. Mike out.